Dad.
The word was barely more than a breath, a thin thread of sound in the quiet room. Eleanor Hayes froze in the doorway. Her hands slipped. The folder of medical reports slid from her fingers and scattered across the polished floor, papers fanning out like injured birds. She didn't even look down. Her eyes were fixed on her twin daughters. Aurora's lips were still parted, her small chest rising and falling too fast. Isla's fingers trembled on the armrest of her wheelchair, eyes wide with something between terror and relief. Both girls were turned away from her. They were facing the man standing in the far corner of the therapy room, dark skin, shoulders hunched as if he could make himself smaller, a mop still dripping water at his side. "Dad," Isla whispered again, softer this time, reaching one shaking hand toward him. The mop handle slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The room held its breath. Eleanor's jaw clenched. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. Not one word. Not to doctors, not to therapists, not to her. And when they finally did, the first word they chose was not mom. It was dad. For a man who had been hired to clean her floors. For a black janitor in a faded uniform who was supposed to be invisible. Her lungs burned. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it came out as a shaky exhale. "Again," the speech therapist whispered, eyes shining behind her glasses. "Aurora, can you say that again?" Aurora didn't look at her. Her attention was glued to the man in the corner, to Darnell Carter. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. Aurora swallowed, eyes filling with tears. Her voice fractured, but the syllable was still there, unmistakable. "Dad?" Papers crackled under Eleanor's heel as she stepped forward, the sound suddenly too loud. Everyone turned to her as if waking from a spell. In that moment, she wasn't the billionaire who owned half of Seaside Cliff. She was just a woman whose daughters had chosen someone else. A stranger. And to understand how that word shattered her. We have to go back a few weeks, to when Hayes Manor was still completely silent. The mansion sat on the edge of the world. That was how people in town spoke about it, half in awe, half in resentment. Hayes Manor rose from the cliffs of Seaside Cliff, Maine, its stone walls stained by decades of salt and winter storms. The Atlantic stretched out beyond the glass walls like a permanent threat, gray, restless, and endless. Inside, everything was controlled. Lights on timers. Gates that closed with a soft, hydraulic whisper. Security cameras in every hallway, feeding into a bank of screens in a locked room. Nurses and therapists moved through the house like ghosts, speaking softly, never staying longer than their shifts demanded. Money, Eleanor had learned, could buy expertise. It could not buy sound. Not the kind that mattered. In the East Wing, past a series of echoing hallways, was a room with floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 wheelchairs were positioned side by side, always facing the ocean. Aurora Hayes, Rory to the few who dared call her that, had her father's eyes. Sharp, observant, too intelligent to be fooled by soft words and fake smiles. Her legs lay limp, secured by a strap, hands resting in her lap, fingers always moving as if she were counting something only she could see. Isla Hayes was smaller, her shoulders hunched, fingers quick to curl into fists whenever thunder rolled or a stranger entered the room. She flinched at loud sounds, even the sudden closing of a door. Both girls had been diagnosed at birth with spinal muscular atrophy. Their bodies were fragile and weak. Their tongues, the doctors said, were simply non-functional. Some children never develop speech, one specialist had told Eleanor, his voice clinically gentle. "Prepare yourself for that possibility." She had nodded, already calculating the cost of private speech therapists, experimental therapies, specialists that charged more for an hour than some people made in a month. Eleanor could face anything if she had a plan. Anything except the silence when her daughters looked at her and their mouths did not move. She filled the gap with action. Schedules, treatments, renovations. She built ramps and widened doorways, installed lifts and ordered custom wheelchairs from Europe. But at night, when the storm winds howled around the mansion and the monitors hummed softly at the girl's bedside, the silence pressed in. Sometimes she'd stand in the doorway, watching their chests rise and fall in the glow of the machines. "This isn't your fault," she'd whisper, though she didn't believe it, because somewhere in the back of her mind the thought gnawed. Maybe she had broken them. Maybe the universe was punishing her, to give her everything she'd ever wanted, then take back the one thing she couldn't control. Her husband's death had only confirmed it. Jonathan Hayes, brilliant, reckless, the kind of man who turned ideas into empires. He had loved music almost as much as he loved startups and risk. There were nights he'd sit at the piano in the old music room, fingers moving across the keys while Eleanor worked through spreadsheets at the table, the girls asleep upstairs. Then one rainy December morning, a car hadn't stopped at a light. In the aftermath, lawyers and funeral homes had slid into her life like another kind of storm. She'd signed papers with hands that barely stopped shaking, accepted condolences like scripted lines in a play. But the worst moment had been alone in his study. His chair still pulled out, a coffee mug still half full, a leather notebook on the desk, closed, a pen tucked neatly inside. She'd picked up the notebook, thumb brushing over the worn cover. Then she'd put it in the drawer and shut it. She never opened it again. Not for 2 years. When the property management firm sent over a stack of candidates for a janitor position, Eleanor didn't bother reading the profiles in full detail. She was used to delegating. There were too many moving parts, too many logistics. A signature was just another gesture. Still, the morning the new hire arrived, she happened to be in the foyer, glancing over her schedule on a tablet as the front door opened and the cold morning air spilled in. He stepped inside, holding his hat in his hands. Broad shoulders, uniform a little too big on him, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, dark forearms. His skin gleamed like polished mahogany under the chandelier. His eyes, deep, dark, steady, took in the foyer and then dropped respectfully. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked quietly. She blinked, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. "Yes, you must be—" "Carter, ma'am. Darnell Carter." He gave a small nod, not quite a bow. "From the management company." Her eyes flicked over him, taking inventory. Clean, polite, hands calloused from work. No visible tattoos, no jewelry, no attitude. "You'll be responsible for maintenance and cleaning," she said crisply. "The East Wing has medical equipment. Don't touch anything without asking the nurses. The children's room is off limits unless you're escorted." "Yes, ma'am." "If you see anything broken, report it to Mrs. Klein, the house manager. We maintain a tight schedule here." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't look at the paintings, didn't admire the staircase, just stood there, hat in his hands, waiting. Something about that bothered her. People usually stared. "You'll get a security badge and a full briefing from Mrs. Klein," she finished. "Good day, Mr. Carter." He nodded again. "Thank you, ma'am." She dismissed him from her mind by the time she reached her office. He was just another employee in a house full of them. The first time Aurora noticed him, he was fixing a leaky radiator at the end of the east hallway. Eleanor watched from the door of the twins' room as the girls were wheeled back from another therapy session. A nurse pushed Aurora's chair, another guided Isla. Their wheels whispered over the polished floor. Down the hall, Darnell knelt by the radiator, tools spread carefully on a cloth. He was humming under his breath, a melody so low it was almost inaudible. Aurora's head snapped up. Her gaze tracked the sound like a compass finding north. Her fingers stilled. Isla stopped fiddling with the strap on her wheelchair. Her breathing slowed. Eleanor frowned. "Is there a problem?" she asked the nurse. "No, Mrs. Hayes, I think they're just looking at him." Looking at him was an understatement. They stared, like they were watching something they'd never seen before. Darnell didn't seem to notice. His head was bent, shoulders relaxed as he tightened a valve. The hum in his chest continued, soft, steady, familiar in some strange way Eleanor couldn't place. "Mr. Carter," she called sharply. He flinched, glancing up. "Yes, ma'am?" Her daughter's eyes didn't leave his face. "Please keep noise to a minimum in this wing." He nodded quickly. "Of course. I apologize." The humming ceased, but Aurora kept watching him until the nurse pushed her chair into the room and the door whispered shut. It continued in small ways. A week later, the house manager approached Eleanor in the kitchen. "Mrs. Hayes," Mrs. Klein began carefully, "there's something you might want to know." Eleanor didn't look up from her tablet. "Is it about the contractors? They're late already." "No, ma'am. It's about Mr. Carter." She paused. "Is there an issue?" "No, not an issue." The older woman hesitated. "But the nurses say the girls seem calmer when he's nearby." That made Eleanor look up. Or look, how so? "He's been assigned some tasks in the East Wing. Polishing floors, checking vents, that sort of thing. The staff noticed that when he happens to be in the hallway, the twins, they don't fuss as much. Their heart rates on the monitor go down. Less panic during storms." Eleanor's expression hardened. "That could be coincidence." "Of course, ma'am. Just thought you'd want to know." She went back to her tablet, but the words stuck. Calmer when he's nearby. That night, as rain began to patter against the windows, Eleanor lingered in the hall outside her daughter's room. Darnell was mopping the far end, moving with slow, careful strokes, back muscles flexing under the uniform. Again he was humming, not a tune she recognized. Simple, repetitive, like something improvised to soothe. Inside the room, Aurora's eyes drifted toward the open doorway. Isla's fingers unclenched. Eleanor glanced at the small monitor mounted on the wall, displaying their vitals, heart rates, lower than the previous storm. Her throat tightened. "Mr. Carter," she called. He stopped immediately. "Yes, ma'am?" "What are you humming?" He shifted his weight. "Just a little tune, ma'am." "From where?" His eyes flicked down, then back up. "Made it up. For my daughter." Eleanor blinked. "You have a daughter?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice softened on the word. "Amara. She's 10. And you for her?" "Helps her sleep sometimes," he said. "Helps her when the pain's bad." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Is she ill?" He hesitated, then nodded. "She can't walk. Wheelchair. Different reason than the girls. But the scared part?" His hand hovered in the air near his chest. "Feels the same." The words hung between them. She didn't know what to do with that. "Keep it down," she murmured finally. "But you can continue." 2 days later, she heard more than humming. It happened on a Tuesday. Wind battered the windows, and the old pipes in the mansion groaned in protest. Most of the staff moved faster on storm days. They knew the twins' episodes tended to worsen. Eleanor was in her husband's old study, forced into the room by a burst pipe in her office. The desk had been cleared of almost everything that had once been Jonathan's. Photographs in drawers, papers in boxes. Only the leather notebook remained in its place in the drawer where she'd shoved it 2 years earlier. She told herself she'd kept it for the girls, for when they grew up. But the truth was simpler. She was afraid of what was inside. Thunder rolled overhead, long and low. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed too hard. The security monitors flickered. From the east wing, a high, strangled sound cut through the hum of the house. Isla. Eleanor's heart lurched. She was halfway to the door when a nurse's voice echoed over the intercom, strained. "Mrs. Hayes, we have them." Static swallowed the rest. She moved faster. The hallway was dimmer than usual, lights flickering as the storm battered the cliffs. When she reached the corner, she almost collided with Mrs. Klein. "They're in distress," the house manager said, breathless. "The power surge scared them. The backup battery for the monitor is glitching. We're stabilizing, but—" Another wave of static crackled from the intercom. From the twins' room, the sound came again. This time, both voices. No words, just panicked primal noise. And beneath it, something else. A voice. Male. Deep. Singing. Eleanor pushed past Mrs. Klein. At the end of the hall, a door stood partially open. Inside, Aurora and Isla shook in their wheelchairs, eyes wide, fingers digging into the armrests. A nurse knelt between them, murmuring, but they seemed deaf to her. And there, next to the far wall, near the built-in bookcases, stood Darnell. He had no right to be there. He shouldn't have been anywhere near her daughters without permission. What stopped Eleanor from shouting was not the fact of his presence. It was what he was doing. He was holding something in his hands, a small, leather-bound notebook. Her notebook. No, Jonathan's notebook. It was open to a creased page. His lips moved quietly as if following words on the paper. Then his voice rose, soft but steady. He sang. The melody was simple, bare, even. Not a professional's polished performance, but something raw and private. His tone wrapped around each word like he was cradling it in his palms. Safe in the storm, my little one. No wave can reach where you are held. Eleanor's heart stopped. She knew those words. Not because she'd heard them sung before, but because she had seen them, years ago, late one night, scribbled in Jonathan's handwriting on that very page. She'd read them once, closed the notebook, and never looked again. Aurora's breathing slowed. Isla's fists loosened. They both leaned ever so slightly toward the sound. He moved closer, steps careful, keeping a respectful distance, but closing the invisible gap between their fear and his voice. His hand, calloused and dark, rested gently on the back of Aurora's chair, not gripping, just anchoring. Safe in the dark, my brightest light, I'll be your day inside the night. Their eyes glistened. The nurse glanced up, startled, but said nothing. Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. How did he know those words? How did he have that notebook? Her notebook. Jonathan's notebook. She stepped forward, the heel of her shoe squeaking. His gaze flicked to her for half a second. He kept singing. When the last line fell into the quiet, the storm outside seemed suddenly farther away. He closed the notebook, fingers lingering on the worn cover. Aurora's eyes were still on his face. Isla's breathing was almost normal. Eleanor inhaled slowly, controlling her voice with an effort. "Mr. Carter," she said, each syllable iced. "A word. Now." In the study, the storm sounded angrier. Rain hammered the windows. The old glass rattled as wind shoved at it. Lightning flared, briefly illuminating the room in a sterile white. Darnell stood in front of the desk, soaked uniform clinging to his arms. He held the notebook in both hands like he was afraid to put it down. Eleanor took it from him with careful fingers, as though contact might burn. Who told you you could touch this? Her tone was too calm. That was always a bad sign. No one, ma'am, he said quietly. I was looking for towels in the cabinet. The drawer must have slid open. It fell. Then you put it back. Her eyes burned into his. You don't open a dead man's notebook and turn his words into some kind of performance for my children. He flinched. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't explain why you were in their room without authorization, or why you thought singing was appropriate when they were in distress. His shoulders tensed, then dropped again. They were scared, he said simply. The power went out for a minute. The monitors beeped. They started shaking. The nurse tried everything else, so He swallowed. So you what? She pushed. So I did the only thing I know how to do when a child is that scared, he said. I stayed. I talked. And I sang. Eleanor's grip tightened on the notebook. With my husband's words. He looked at the leather cover, and something like reverence passed over his face. I didn't know whose they were, he admitted. I just recognized them. Her eyes narrowed. How could you recognize them? He exhaled slowly. Because I have something similar at home. Pages and pages of things I wrote for my daughter. Promises, little songs. Stuff you scribble when you're up at 3 in the morning holding a kid who doesn't stop crying until you sing the same 3 notes over and over. His voice thickened slightly. I recognized the desperation in them, he said softly. Whoever wrote that loved those girls before they even knew they were coming into the world. He was trying to build them a shelter out of words. The storm outside pounded its agreement. For a moment, she saw Jonathan, not as the visionary tech founder, not as the billionaire genius, but as the man who once stayed up all night in a cheap apartment, humming nonsense melodies into her belly, promising everything he had and everything he was to 2 lives he hadn't met yet. Behind her anger, something fragile twisted. Mr. Carter, she said, voice lower. This is an enormous breach of privacy. I know, ma'am, he said. I'm sorry. Her jaw clenched. Why do they respond to you? My daughters don't react to strangers. They barely react to me. The question escaped before she could stop it. He shifted his weight. His gaze moved from the desk to the window, then back to her. They're not just reacting to me, he said. They're reacting to what they hear in me. And what is that exactly? She snapped. A father, he said quietly. The word hung between them like another crack of thunder. She stared at him. He held her gaze now, steady, not defiant, not challenging, just honest. I know what it's like to watch a kid trapped in a body that won't cooperate, he continued. To sit in hospital waiting rooms while doctors tell you what your child will never do. To go home and realize every staircase, every door frame, every crowded sidewalk is a battlefield they're already losing. His fingers curled around the edge of the desk, knuckles pale against his dark skin. I can't fix their muscles. I can't make the world fair. But I can show up. I can be there when the thunder is too loud. He took a breath. I don't know your daughter's medical history, he said. I don't know the therapies or the tests. That ain't my place. But I know fear. I know what it sounds like when a child thinks the world is ending every time the lights flicker. Her throat tightened. There was a tremor in his voice that reminded her of nights alone in a hospital while Jonathan underwent surgery, the smell of antiseptic mixing with the metallic taste of worry. And I know, he added softly, that sometimes the only thing that cuts through that kind of fear is a voice that doesn't leave. Silence sank into the room, deep and heavy. He straightened. "If you want me gone, say the word, ma'am. I'll collect my things." Eleanor looked down at the notebook. The page he'd used was the one she remembered. Tiny, cramped handwriting, corrections in the margins, a little doodle of two small figures holding hands. Jonathan had written the word home 3 times on that page. The irony hit her like another wave. Her daughters had spent their entire lives in this house, surrounded by the best money could buy, and still, somehow, they were homeless in their own skin. "You will not enter their room again without permission," she said finally, voice controlled. "Yes, ma'am. But you will remain employed. For now." He nodded. "And if you ever touch this notebook again without my explicit consent," she added, "you will never set foot in this house again. Are we clear?" "Crystal, ma'am." He turned to go. "Mr. Carter." He stopped. She hesitated. The words tasted strange. "Thank you," she forced out, "for helping them earlier." He nodded once, almost a bow. "Any time, ma'am." He left, but the echo of his song didn't. After that day, Eleanor paid more attention. She watched the security footage in her spare moments, not for threats, but for patterns. On the screen, in grainy black and white, she saw her daughters in ways she'd never noticed before. She saw the way Aurora's gaze tracked every sound in the hallway, cataloging faces, footsteps, voices. She saw Isla's flinches, the way her body pulled inward at sudden movements. And she saw Darnell, moving through the house with quiet efficiency, pushing a cart, replacing a light bulb, tightening a loose railing. She noticed how, when he passed the open door to the twins' room, Aurora's fingers would pause mid-twitch. How Isla's jaw unclenched, ever so slightly. He never went in, not without being asked, not after the incident with the notebook. But sometimes, when a storm rattled the windows or the power dipped, she heard him from the hallway, not singing this time, talking. "Hey!" His voice drifted down the corridor, warm and easy. "You hear that? That's just the wind bluffing again. Thinks it's big and bad. But this house has been here longer than that storm's been breathing. It's gonna pass, okay? You're safe." She watched on the monitor as Aurora's head turned toward the door, as Isla's shoulders loosened. He would lean in the doorway, careful to keep one foot in the hall, one out, respecting the boundary she'd set. "Back where I come from," he'd say, "we used to count between the lightning and the thunder. You know that trick? You count the seconds, and it tells you how far away the storm is. Want to try?" Their mouths didn't move, but their eyes said something else. They were listening. One evening, while Eleanor sat in her office pretending to work, she overheard a conversation in the kitchen. "He sleeps sitting up half the time," one of the maids whispered. "Afraid if he lies down, he won't hear his daughter if she needs him." "She's in a wheelchair too, isn't she?" another answered. "Poor man. Working double shifts here and then going home to care for her." "He refused to leave her alone, I heard. Wouldn't take a job that made him miss her bedtime, even if it paid more." Eleanor found herself gripping her pen too tightly. "Father." The word kept circling back, no matter how hard she tried to steer away from it. Jonathan had been a whirlwind of love and chaos, but he hadn't been around for the worst of it, with the girls. The hospital visits, the diagnoses. He'd died before the reality of their limitations fully settled in. Darnell, on the other hand, had been living in that reality for years, with another little girl in a chair of her own. One night, as rain slashed sideways across the windows and distant thunder rolled over the sea, Eleanor stood in the hallway outside her daughter's room, watching through the slightly open door. The nurse had just left. The monitors glowed soft green. Aurora stared at the window, jaw set. Isla hummed an anxious whimper under her breath. eyes glassy. The lights flickered once. Eleanor's heart jumped. Before she could move, a familiar voice floated from the far end of the hall. "Hey!" Darnell called gently, footsteps careful on the polished floor. "Storm's loud tonight, huh?" He didn't enter the room. He just stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "You know what I tell Amara when she gets scared?" he continued. "I tell her storms are just the sky, practicing its drum solo." Aurora blinked. Isla's mouth twitched. "Not very good at it, if you ask me," he added. "Too much noise, not enough rhythm." A tiny sound puffed from Isla's throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "What we do when the sky's making all that fuss," he said, "is we make our own sound, so we don't feel so small." He began to tap lightly on the doorframe. A simple pattern. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. "See? Now that's a beat," he said, smiling a little. "You can tap along if you want. Or just listen. Either way, you're not alone with the thunder anymore." Aurora's finger began to move, rhythm matching his. Eleanor felt something prick behind her eyes. She left before anyone could see. The call came on a night when the storm wasn't outside, but inside the house. A nor'easter had been predicted for days. Eleanor had arranged her schedule accordingly. But one emergency board meeting stretched longer than planned, and before she knew it, the city's streets were slick with ice and rain, and the power grid was strained. She sat at a long glass table in a downtown high-rise, surrounded by men in tailored suits arguing about quarterly projections, when her phone buzzed. "House." Klein flashed on the screen. Her stomach dropped. She excused herself and answered in the hallway. "Mrs. Hayes." Mrs. Klein's voice broke through, breathless and jagged. Wind howled faintly in the background. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have a situation." Ice formed in her veins. "The girls?" "The power went out for several minutes. The generator kicked in, but the monitors in the twins' room, they started beeping erratically. Both girls are in full distress. We've stabilized their vitals, but they won't calm down. We've tried everything." Eleanor's hand shook. "Put me on speaker with them." A rustle. Then the sound shifted. She heard sobbing breaths, harsh, jagged, too loud. Isla. Aurora's distress was quieter, but no less intense. Small gasps, a soft choking sound like her throat was rebelling against her own fear. "Girls," Eleanor said, forcing her voice steady. "It's Mom! I'm here! You're safe! Do you hear me? You're safe!" No response. Their breathing remained frantic, a car skidding on ice. She tried again. She told them the storm would pass, that the lights were back, that the machines were working, that she was on her way. Nothing. A nurse's voice came faintly through the line. "Their panic isn't responding, Mrs. Hayes. This has happened before after blackouts, but never this bad." Over the chaos, Eleanor heard Mrs. Klein speaking to someone else in the room. "We can't reach Mr. Carter. His phone's going straight to voicemail." "Try again," the nurse urged. "When he's here, they—" Eleanor cut in. "What does Mr. Carter have to do with this?" Silence. Then Mrs. Klein cleared her throat. "He's been helpful during previous episodes, ma'am. The girls seem to respond to his presence. And his voice." A strange mix of anger and something like hope flooded her. "Call him," Eleanor said. "Now! We've tried. Call him again." Another rustle. A few seconds of ringing piped through the speaker. Then a click. "Hello?" His voice came through over noise. Traffic, maybe. The hum of a city bus. "Mr. Carter, it's Mrs. Klein at Hayes Manor. I have you on speaker with Mrs. Hayes. The twins are in severe distress. The storm knocked the power earlier. "Oh, God," he breathed. She could hear his footsteps quickening, the echo of a stairwell. "Is Aurora breathing okay? Is Isla's monitor stable?" "Vitals are holding for now," the nurse answered, "but they're panicking. Nothing we do is helping. Could you put me close to them?" he said immediately. "As close as you can. Phone between them. They need to hear me." There was a scramble, then the sound shifted again. The crying was louder now, like they'd moved the phone right beside the wheelchairs. "Hey," he said, and his voice was different now, softer, rougher, laden with the kind of love that doesn't care who's listening. "Hey, little sunshines, it's me, Mr. D." Aurora's gasps hitched. Isla's sob whined higher. "I hear that Storm's being a real show-off tonight," he continued, a hint of a smile in his tone. "Think it's scaring you. But you know what? It doesn't know who it's dealing with." His footfalls echoed rapidly in the background. "You're Hayes girls," he murmured. "You live in a stone castle on a cliff. You've seen worse than a little thunder, huh?" The crying stuttered. "That's it," he coaxed. "Breathe with me, okay? In 2, 3, out, 2, 3. He inhaled loudly into the phone, slowly, exaggerated, like teaching a child to blow out candles. "Again," he said. "In 2, 3, out, 2, 3. Somewhere between the breaths, between the storm and the static, he began to hum. Not the old improvised tune, the lullaby, the one from Jonathan's notebook. His voice wrapped around the words gently, folding them into the space between the girls and the storm. "Safe in the storm, my little ones." The sobs softened. Their frantic gasps slowed. Eleanor stood in the glass hallway of a skyscraper, forehead against the cool window, listening to a janitor sing her dead husband's words to their daughters. "Safe in the dark, my brightest lights." The beating in her chest found the rhythm of his song. By the time the last line faded, she could barely hear the girls crying, just their tiny, shaky breaths slowly sinking to his. "You're okay," he whispered. "You're not alone. I'm right here, yeah? I ain't going nowhere." There was a rustle as someone checked the monitors. "They're stabilizing," the nurse said, wonder in her voice. "Heart rate's down, muscle tension easing." On the other end of the line, she heard a door slam and rain grow louder around him. "Mr. Carter, where are you?" Eleanor asked. "On my way to the bus stop," he panted. "But if the power's glitching on the cliffs, the buses might not be running. I'll get there as fast as I can." "You already are," the nurse said quietly. Eleanor found herself speaking before she could think. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Don't hang up," she said. "Not until they're asleep." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't. He talked to them the entire time, about nothing and everything. About the time he burned toast and set off the smoke alarm in his own apartment. About how his daughter Amara insists on naming every seagull they see. About the silly voice he uses when reading storybooks. He wove a world around them with words, stretching from his tiny apartment to their massive mansion, until the distance didn't feel so wide, until their breathing turned slow and even, until the storm outside no longer mattered. Eleanor met Amara 2 days later. She drove herself. No chauffeur, no security detail. The address Mrs. Klein had given her led to a low, aging apartment building in the poorer part of town. The paint peeled from its exterior. The elevator was out of order, handwritten sign taped crooked on its doors. She climbed the stairs slowly, the smell of old cooking oil and damp carpet thick in the air. On the 3rd floor, a door stood half open. From inside came the sound of laughter. High, breathy, punctuated by a cough. Eleanor knocked softly. "Come in," Darnell's voice called. She pushed the door open. The apartment was small, worn but clean. Second-hand furniture arranged carefully to maximize space. A narrow kitchen, a tiny living room, and in that living room, beneath a window framed by sheer faded curtains, sat a girl in a wheelchair. Her skin was a warm, deep brown. Her hair was pulled into a puff at the back of her head. A blanket covered her thin legs. A sketchbook rested on her lap, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Her eyes, large, bright, curious, flicked up to Eleanor immediately. "Hi," she said, voice a little breathy but clear. "Are you from Dad's work?" Eleanor blinked. "Yes, I'm Mrs. Hayes." "Oh." The girl's smile grew. "You're the castle lady." Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. "I suppose some people call me that." From the kitchenette, Darnell turned, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His eyebrows shot up when he saw Eleanor standing there. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, startled. Sorry about the mess." It wasn't messy. Not compared to most homes with a child. But compared to Hayes Manor, it was another planet. A TV on a milk crate. Books stacked in piles. A drawer tied shut with twine. The faint sound of a neighbor's music leaking through the thin walls. Amara's wheelchair was older, scuffed in places but well maintained. Stickers peeled slightly at the edges. A cartoon sun, a crooked rainbow. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said, stepping closer. "If this is about the other night, It is," she said, "but not for the reasons you think." His jaw tightened, shoulders squaring, as though bracing for impact. "Your daughter?" Eleanor asked, turning back to the girl. "Amara, right?" Amara beamed. "Yes, ma'am." "How old are you?" 10, she said proudly. "I'm older than your girls." Eleanor tilted her head. "You know my daughters?" "Only from the pictures Dad has on his phone," Amara said. "And from what he tells me, he says they're warriors." Darnell cleared his throat. "Amara." "What?" She grinned at him. "You do." Warriors. She'd thought of Aurora and Isla as fragile, delicate, breakable. Warriors hadn't occurred to her. She looked around again. The apartment wasn't designed for wheelchairs, and yet ramps, makeshift and ingenious, were placed where needed. A strip of wood here, a rearranged piece of furniture there. The table had one chair pulled back, leaving space for Amara to wheel up. "Is it just you two?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Darnell said. "Her mother left when she was 3. This is us." The girl didn't flinch at that. Whatever pain there'd been had long since been woven into their daily reality. "And you work nights?" Eleanor asked. "Sometimes," he said. "Tried to keep it to days so I can be home to help her with bedtime. But Hayes Manor needed—" He broke off, realizing who he was talking to. "I mean, your house needed extra coverage," he corrected. "How do you manage her care?" she asked. "Medical equipment? Therapy?" His eyes dropped for a second. "We do what we can, ma'am. Clinic at the county hospital. They have a good pediatric unit, and there's a charity that helps with some equipment. I take extra shifts when I can, but—" He glanced at Amara, whose attention had returned to her sketchbook. "But we can't afford a lot of what would help her most," he finished in a lower voice. "Not like what your girls have." The unfairness of it slammed into her. Her daughters had the best that money could buy and were still trapped in their silence. His daughter had scraps and ingenuity, and yet there was light in her eyes. "What are you drawing?" Eleanor asked suddenly. Amara turned the sketchbook around. On the page, in surprisingly steady pencil lines, was a rough picture of a house on a cliff. Windows like eyes, a ramp leading up to the front door, a tiny figure in a wheelchair at the edge of the property, looking out at the sea. "Is that Hayes Manor?" Eleanor asked. "Kind of." Amara shrugged. "I haven't seen it in real life, but Dad describes it. I thought maybe one day—" She trailed off. "One day what?" Eleanor asked. "One day I could visit," she said softly. "See the ocean. Meet your girls. Maybe they'd like to draw with me." Eleanor's chest ached. All the cameras and gates and high-tech locks in the world couldn't keep that truth out. There was more love in this tiny, worn apartment than in half the rooms in Hayes Manor. She thought of her daughter's first word, Dad. Not for the man whose blood they shared, but for the man whose voice had stayed in the dark. Her decision came out almost before she knew she was making it. "Mr. Carter," she said. He straightened. "Yes, ma'am?" "I have a proposition for you." His shoulders tensed. "If this is about overtime, ma'am, I already—" "It's not about overtime," she cut in. "It's about a different arrangement." He waited, confused, guarded. "I want you and Amara to move into Hayes Manor." The room went silent. "What?" he asked, as if he'd misheard. "I want you to live there," she repeated. "Not in the servants' quarters, in the house, as part of the household." He stared at her like she were speaking another language. "My daughters need you," she said plainly. "Not as a janitor, not as a security guard, as someone who can reach them where doctors can't." She swallowed. "And I think your daughter could benefit from what the manor can offer," she added. "Medical equipment, therapies, space, a view of the ocean instead of the parking lot." Emotion flickered across his face. Hope, fear, disbelief. "Mrs. Hayes," he said slowly, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," she replied. "We would work out a formal agreement. You would continue your employment. You'd have your own space, boundaries, salaries adjusted accordingly." "And my daughter?" he asked quietly. "Amara would not be the help's kid," Eleanor said firmly. "She would be treated as one of the girls of Hayes Manor. Equal, no exceptions." Amara's eyes had grown wide, bouncing between them. "Dad," she whispered. "A castle." He exhaled, a shaky, disbelieving sound that was almost a laugh. "You sure about this, ma'am?" he asked. "Having a black man and his disabled daughter living under your roof? People talk." She met his gaze steadily. "Let them," she said. "They already do." A slow, incredulous smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He looked at his daughter. "Amara?" he asked. "What do you think?" She grinned so hard her eyes nearly disappeared. "I think," she said, "that your girls are going to need someone to teach them the best way to draw the ocean." His laugh broke the tension. He turned back to Eleanor, eyes suspiciously bright. Then, "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We'll come." Hayes Manor changed in ways no renovation could have accomplished. At first, the staff whispered more than usual. A black janitor moving into the main house with his child. It broke lines most of them hadn't even realized were drawn. But little by little, the house began to acclimate to this new gravity. A third wheelchair appeared in the east wing, smaller than Aurora's and Isla's, stickers bright and defiant against the polished floors. The therapists adjusted their programs to include Amara in group exercises when appropriate. Her laughter filled hallways that had only known hushed voices and professional neutrality. Aurora watched her carefully at first, those sharp eyes taking in the way Amara used her hands to compensate, the way she maneuvered her chair with small, precise pushes. Isla was more hesitant. She clung to familiar things, her blanket, her routine, the place by the window where she could watch the waves. But Amara had the gentle persistence of someone who'd spent her whole life waiting for the world to catch up. She would wheel herself between the twins, lay her sketchbook across her lap, and draw. "See this?" she'd say. "That's the ocean. That's your house. That's a turtle. I've never seen one in real life, but I like them. They carry home on their back." Aurora's fingers would twitch toward the pencil. Isla's eyes would follow every line. On evenings when the sky turned pink over the water, Darnell would push all three girls to the big window in the east room, the one Jonathan had insisted on, so his daughters would always see the horizon. He would park their chairs side by side, a small fleet facing the sea. The first time Eleanor saw them like that, her heart almost stopped. 3 wheelchairs. 3 small girls. One man standing behind them, hands resting lightly on the backs of their chairs. A father's stance. She remembered standing in that same spot once with Jonathan, his arm around her, their future still an unopened gift. Now the shape of her family was different, but it was a family all the same. "Storm's coming in," Darnell murmured, watching the distant dark line on the water. Amara hummed thoughtfully. "How far away?" "Let's count," he said. "Lightning, then we count seconds until thunder." He glanced at Aurora and Isla. "You two in?" he asked. They didn't speak, but Aurora's hand lifted, slow, deliberate, answer enough. Isla leaned slightly closer to him. They counted together. 1, 2, 3. Thunder rumbled. 3 miles, he announced. Plenty of time. The day the twins spoke, the storm had passed. The air was crystal clear, washed clean by the night's violence. Sunlight poured into the therapy room, warming the hardwood floor. It was a routine session. At least it started that way. The speech therapist crouched in front of Aurora, holding up picture cards. A sun, a house, a dog, a car. Her words were steady, patient. She'd done this 1,000 times. "Can you try to make a sound for sun, Aurora?" she coaxed. "Any sound at all." Aurora's jaw worked. Her throat flexed. A wheeze escaped, more air than voice. "Good effort," the therapist said. "Again?" In the corner, mopping up a spill left by an overturned cup, was Darnell. He hadn't meant to be there, but Mrs. Klein had asked him to help with a leak, and the timing lined up, and now he hummed as quietly as he could, trying not to interfere. Eleanor stood by the door, pretending to review a document on her tablet. Really, she just needed an excuse to be there. Isla sat next to her sister, eyes half-lidded, as if exhausted by another morning of effort that never seemed to lead anywhere. The therapist switched strategies. She pulled out a worn photograph. Jonathan, holding 2 swaddled babies in his arms, eyes crinkled, cheeks damp. Eleanor beside him, younger, less guarded, hair mussed, gaze soft and stunned. "Remember him?" the therapist asked gently. "That's your dad." Aurora's eyes locked onto the picture, her fingers curled against the armrest. Isla stared, pupils dilating. Across the room, Darnell's humming faded. He glanced up, expression unreadable. "Dad," the therapist repeated. "Can you look at me, Aurora?" Slowly, Aurora dragged her gaze from the photo to the therapist's face. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Dad," the therapist said again, enunciating each sound. "Duh, duh." Aurora's throat bobbed, her lips parted. A tiny strangled noise emerged. The therapist leaned closer. "That's it. Try again." Aurora swallowed. Unbidden, as if called by something deeper than memory, her eyes slid past the therapist, past Eleanor. to the corner of the room, to where Darnell stood, mop in hand, frozen in place like someone had hit pause. Her chest rose, fell, rose again. Her lips trembled, forming a shape they had never made before. "D," she gasped. Eleanor straightened. The therapist exhaled in disbelief. Yes, yes, that's it. Again. Aurora's gaze stayed locked on Darnell. "Dad," she breathed. The mop handle slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. Isla jerked, as if yanked by an invisible string. Her lungs dragged in a breath that sounded like it hurt. "D," Isla echoed, voice cracked with disuse. Every cell in Eleanor's body screamed for that word to be hers. Just one time. Just once. "Dad," Isla choked out, tears spilling over. "Dad." They reached for him. Not for the photograph. Not for the memory of a man who existed now only in frames and stories. For the man who'd stood in storms and on phone lines and in doorways, refusing to leave. For the man whose voice had built them a bridge out of their fear. For him. For Darnell. The therapist's hand flew to her mouth. Eleanor's tablet slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Eleanor inhaled. "Again," she whispered hoarsely. "Say it again." But the twins didn't look at her. They kept their eyes on Darnell, tears streaming down their cheeks. Their mouths moved, the words spilling out in hoarse, broken repetition. "Dad! Dad! Dad!" His eyes shone. He shook his head as if denying something he desperately wanted to accept. "Girls," he murmured, voice rough. "No, I'm not." Isla sobbed harder. Aurora clung to the word like a lifeline. Somewhere beneath the sharp pain of being passed over, a quieter truth nudged Eleanor. They weren't saying he was their father. They were naming the shape of what he was to them. Safety. Presence. The voice that stayed. She stepped back, leaning against the wall to stay upright. Later, in the privacy of her bedroom, she would cry. Not because they hadn't said "Mom" first, but because after 5 years of silence, they'd spoken at all. For now, she watched. Darnell crossed the room slowly, as if afraid to spook them. He stopped just out of arm's reach. "Okay," he whispered, chest heaving. "Okay. I hear you." He knelt so their gazes were level. "I'm here," he said. "Always." Aurora sobbed and tried to lean forward, most of the motion happening only in her shoulders. Isla hiccuped, breath stuttering around the word. "Dad." It echoed in the room. Not a replacement, an addition. And somehow, standing there with tears burning her eyes and her heart cracking open in a way that felt strangely like healing, Eleanor understood. Sometimes, a house is built by one man and lived in by another. Sometimes, children are born from one love and saved by another. Sometimes, family is not about whose blood runs through whose veins, but about whose voice does not leave when the thunder starts. Weeks later, on a soft Sunday evening, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the East Room and watched her new family. That's what it was now. Not a mansion, not a facility, a home. Aurora and Isla sat in their wheelchairs, side by side, eyes bright, mouths working hard over new sounds their therapist had given them. Amara sat between them, sketchbook open, pencil flying as she drew the three of them as tiny warriors on top of a cliff. Outside, the ocean rolled and hissed, but tonight it sounded less like a threat and more like applause. Darnell stood behind them, one hand resting gently on the back of each chair in turn, grounding them all. "Again," he encouraged, smiling. "You got this." Aurora took a deep breath, jaw working. Ma, she forced out. It was rough, frayed, barely there, but it landed like a miracle. Isla followed, softer. Ma. He turned his head. Their eyes were on Eleanor this time, on her. Her vision blurred. She took a step into the room, hand over her heart. That's right, Darnell said softly. There she is. She moved to stand beside him. He didn't step away. His arm brushed hers. They stood like that, shoulder to shoulder, watching three girls on three wheels reach for words and worlds they'd been denied for so long. On the nearby table, Jonathan's leather notebook lay open. The lullaby's page was marked not with grief now, but with a small drawing Amara had made. A house, 3 wheelchairs, and 2 adults standing behind them. Family sketched in pencil. Outside, the last light of day slid across the water. Inside, 3 voices, thin, fragile, but real, struggled toward her name. And somewhere, in the space between one storm and the next, Eleanor realized that the mansion on the cliff was no longer just a monument to loss. It was, at last, a home. Some children need medicine. Some need wheelchairs and machines and charts filled with numbers. But before all of that, they need a voice that stays with them in the dark. They need someone who doesn't leave when the thunder starts. If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a quiet fear, feel free to leave a message in your heart for Aurora, Isla, Amara, and for Darnell, the man who chose to love like a father long before anyone gave him that name. You're not as alone in your storms as you think.